Previously on Popping Collars.
But can I do two? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ricardo.
I mean,
Sorry, not sorry.
you just go with your white male straight privilege.
Yep, straight white man.
You go right ahead, sweetie. Yeah. I mean,
let me just kind of spread out here and yeah.
Can you really explain it to me? Because I think I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm sorry. Let's see. I'm going to mute you, Betsy, so that I can. Okay.
Great. Welcome to episode 98 of Popping Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection of religion and pop culture. I'm Liz Easton. I'm going to be your host today. And yay! I'm the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Nebraska. And with me are my co-hosts, Greg Knight in Palm Beach, Florida. Greg, what are you up to?
Oh, Liz, just living the dream down here on the beach in Florida. Where I'm the director of children and youth ministries at the Church of Bethesda by the Sea. I should say, not to spoil the topic, but I should say that once people understand the combination of you, me, and Ricardo on the show, they should know that it's a music episode that's about to happen, I think.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's right.
We've got that pattern going for us.
We do. Which brings us to our other co-host, Ricardo Avila from Los Gatos, California. Ricardo, how are you doing? What's going on?
Hi, Liz. Liz, yes, as you said, I am Ricardo Avila. Thanks for the reminder. I am the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Los Gatos, California. I just got back from, speaking of music, seeing Bohemian Rhapsody, the story of Queen, and I am ready to take the stage. It just makes you want to go up in front of a bunch of people and just belt it out. I cannot sing half the stuff Freddie Mercury sings because it's way too high for me, but it was so great just to see a rock movie. And there was a preview, a trailer. There's going to be an Elton John movie coming out next summer.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I would love that.
Crazily enough.
Our special guest on this episode is Jeremiah Loverich, coming to us from Sacramento, California. Jeremiah, tell us who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, well, thanks, Liz. I was thrilled to be asked to be part of this. So, currently teaching theology at the high school level. Come from a background of philosophy and theology. Was in seminary for a few years, and am now directing those interests in another avenue. Trying to uncorrupt the youth, so to speak.
That's what Greg's trying to do, too. Our episode 98 of Popping Collars, is one of those episodes that I think that sometimes if you're a pop culture podcast or you talk about popular culture, you sometimes maybe take for granted what is right in front of your face. And the truth of the matter is that country music is the most popular music in the United States. It has more radio stations, more downloads, more listens, more concert sale tickets than any other musical genre. And sometimes we forget that, I think. So it seems worth having an episode focused just on that music. I think listeners of our podcast know that I am a country music fan, kind of in the broadest sense of the term. I love especially classic country. I love the history of country western music because of when I was really into that music. Really did have a big impact on my faith formation. So there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about today and that we will probably touch on. But I'll get started by asking each of you, are you into country music? And if you are, what do you like? What do you listen to? And let's start with Ricardo.
Oh.
I thought we started
what a surprise! Ricardo, we never start with you. This is so great.
Great for you. I thought I'd just ride this out for the next 10 minutes. Okay, I'll say something. The thing that comes to mind when I think of country music, it's not necessarily that it's country music, but that it's music that inspired me and came at a pivotal moment in my life. And I think you were alluding to something similar in your life. When I first moved to San Francisco, I took the train across the country from Chicago, arrived in Emeryville, California, December of 93, 25 years ago, if I may. And my good friend Beth, who I knew from Madison, Wisconsin, she was living out here. She picked me up. And within a week or so, she said, "Have you ever heard of Lucinda Williams?" And I said, "No." And that got me going on some of that music. And then Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball came out around then, or was already out, and I just got into it. And I thought, this is great stuff. And I know this isn't like straight up country music, middle of the country stuff, but it's about as country music as I get in terms of my embrace. And then I got into Gillian Welch, and then at some point I found Patty Griffin, which I know is now stretching it into more folk. But they all have songs about faith, and I've said this before on this podcast. There's something about hearing it from a source, for me anyway, outside of the organized religion box, that gives it more authenticity to me.
How about you, Greg?
Okay, so I grew up in North Carolina, which meant that I guess by default you had to listen to country music, I guess. Yep. I mean, it's just kind of like it's what's on everybody's pickup truck radio when you're driving around. So what my memories of country music are associated with my childhood, which means that it's a heavy dose of like 70s and 80s country music. Not so much 90s. So when you're talking 70s and 80s, you're talking really like the height of outlaw country. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, Merle Haggard, David Allan Coe, Tony Joe White. Like these were the kinds of guys that I would listen to over and over again. And then by the time the 80s rolled around, I fell in love with Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell sisters, and I was watching Hee Haw as a kid and all of this, so I was introduced to all of that great music, and so yeah, it was just kind of in the background. It was like the soundtrack of your life, I think, growing up. I just love that kind of outsider kind of feel to the country that I grew up with.
What about you, Jeremiah?
My parents were pretty conservative, and they when we were children, they didn't really care for us listening to rock and roll, but they didn't have a problem with country. So we lived while we were working on our projects in the garage, various wood things. We would be playing the local country radio station. Then, of course, when I went on to college, I had to go through my 70s classic rock phase. Before I gradually got out of that. And I discovered Uncle Tupelo, and that was probably one of the and that remains probably one of my favorite bands. I mean, their self-titled album, it's just perfect. It's a work of art. I'm not alone in probably saying that "Oh Brother" was huge for bringing me into bluegrass. After Alison Krauss and Union Station, then it was kind of Gillian Welch, and then spinning out into other genres or variations of the genre.
Yeah, it's really striking to me because I live in Nebraska, obviously, and spend a lot of time traveling across the state by pickup truck, as a matter of fact. And, the radio stations are mostly country music stations, which is fine because I like that. Contemporary country, like what is on the radio right now, is so different from the type of country music that any of us mentioned. And I'm sure that even within the country music community, there's like, you don't want to be a grumpy purist, but it's so different now from the stuff that I grew up listening to.
What's referred to as country music now is, I think, pretty far from its roots. I think there's a deep spiritual tradition, right? Certainly in bluegrass, and then that crosses over to kind of old school country quite a bit. But also, I mean, the themes of like kind of the country music that I like, I mean, it's death and drinking and regret and traveling.
Yep.
I mean, all these long ballads.
It's funny because those are all like old train songs, like old boxcar train songs, old blues songs, kind of mashed up with folk songs, right? So it kind of makes sense that it's that dark kind of like, man, I got to work hard, man, I don't have any possessions, all of that stuff, and then you add that to sort of the amazing sort of songwriting and singing ability of somebody like a Hank Williams or something. You can see how like that inspires an entire generation of musicians to want to do that.
There's always been an acknowledgement of sin in country music and of like rowdiness probably, but that the country music now seems to celebrate it in a way that does not have consequences, maybe. Like kind of the bro country that's about like driving around and partying. Whereas some of the older stuff, they drove around and partied, and then like Jeremiah said, that they went to jail. there was a recourse, for their.
Right.
There's something about pop country now that feels safe. I think there's a reason that like they use country musicians to introduce football games.
But it's a strange hypocrisy too. I mean, when I was listening to it as a kid, I didn't understand a lot of it. But as I got older and I started to recognize what they're talking about, I mean, it can be, startling sexual.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Sexual in some of these lyrics, and it's like So I think that there's something about its facade as wholesome, but rather it's not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just love Coat of Many Colors by Dolly Parton. It makes me cry. You know the song? You know the story of it?
Yeah.
So when she takes his coat to school and everyone laughs at her, and Dolly's voice at the end, like, because she's right. Beauty is and those lessons are so hard to find in music these days. You can, but you gotta kind of slice through the sarcasm and the kind of the cynicism. It's so funny that it's so straight up, for me anyway, straight up sentimental, but it just works. And there's no, it's guileless. It's not like wink, wink off to the side.
I would be sitting in theology classes at seminary or something like that, or even now, like some parishioner will bring up some incredibly genius, article about whatever. And I just feel lost most of the time. Like I can't get a foothold in whatever it is that people are talking about, And I think that what I appreciate about country music is what I appreciate about the church when I get it, which is simplicity. Like there's a simplicity to country music because it's kind of like, it's not that it's watered down, it's that it's filtered to sort of this raw emotion, like what you were talking about, Ricardo, with the Coat of Many Colors. Like, it's this simple line that gets you to the raw emotion of what Dolly Parton's feeling in that moment. When I think of like my spiritual life, it's those moments that I remember, and not like Origin, or like Erasmus or like something like that. Like that's stuff that I can't really I can't find a foothold in. But
remember that you're talking to a theology teacher. There's a theology teacher in the room.
If you make an impassioned sort of like story about your life or something, I don't know. I connect with that, like, I don't know. That's just, I feel like country music has this kind of way of simplifying things a little bit. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremiah. Explain to me why I'm wrong.
I think that the sincerity and the simplicity are interesting. I mean, I guess, to hash that out a little bit more. I mean, certainly you get, bluegrass and harmonies, which is ridiculously complicated musically. Certainly the country music songs we love, are sincere. But I mean, it seems that, say, rap, and other R&B can be very direct and forthright as well.
It seems interesting to me that country music and sort of American Protestantism, revival-based kind of evangelical Protestantism, both have their roots in the South. And like you had, there was the same sort of like bed of creation that bore these two things. And there probably is, like, if I knew more about the history of music, there probably is a direct connection between the development of country music and like revival style Christian worship. But it just seems interesting to me that like there seems to be two sides of country music. There's like the bar room and the church house, and the both of they're coming from the same place culturally. And like I was thinking earlier today how Flannery O'Connor referred to the South as Christ haunted. And sometimes it feels like country music is also a little bit Christ haunted, even if not explicitly. But there is a sort of religiosity in that music.
What's so interesting, when you were speaking about, the roots in the South, it is really interesting. I mean, certainly you have, bluegrass in Appalachia, but there seems to be a power, an uncanny power to Southern geography, right? Like you just mentioned Caroline in a line from a song, and there's something that feels wistful about that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's got to be, West Virginia for John Denver just wouldn't work the same. But there seems to be something about the power of like naming Southern states, and it has an emotional import.
Right. It actually takes a lot of intelligence, in my opinion, to communicate such heartfelt feelings with a simple eloquence. I could sit here and be my systematic theology professor who was a sweetheart, but I could not understand him most of the time. But when Dolly's singing Jolene, or, Barbara Mandrell is singing, If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so good. She is so right. I'd take that song over Karl Barth.
Yeah.
Barbara Mandrell. That's what we should be teaching in seminary. Karl Barth.
You were talking about, Liz, this idea of sort of the rise of Protestant, Southern Christianity in this country. Like, that's a very impassioned sort of, preaching style. It's a very like impassioned form of worship. You may not understand what somebody's saying, and you may not even believe what they're saying, but God, if they're saying it passionately, you kind of listen to them, right?
I bet that there's something like evolutionary or like developmentally that humans respond to a particular kind of harmony in an emotional way. Because I think that that's a lot of what happens in bluegrass, is that it's actually very sophisticated music. It's really technical and complicated, but there's something about the way that we respond to it that is more emotional.
How do we characterize the spirituality of, say, bluegrass? So much of it seems to be focused on this idea of hope in the afterlife when our sorrows will be no more, right? Because we're miserable here on earth. And then that constantly recurring theme of Jordan, right? Of the promised land on the other side, but the promised land isn't one in this world, but rather one in the next. So there's almost seems to be kind of more of an opiate aspect to the spirituality of bluegrass, as in religion being used to console us. But at the same time, you also have very strong social justice themes going on in bluegrass.
There are a number of songs about coal mining where the formula is that the miner dies while mining, and then their bones become coal that somebody else mines later. Like, there's a number of songs that's the theme. And to me, that always seemed really profound. Like this idea of suffering and labor and, and I mean, a lot of these songs were basically union songs. There were songs that union organizers would sing.
There's also a history to country music, what I mean? And all this stuff, rock music. It's not like someone started playing a guitar in the Appalachian Mountains and suddenly it was country music, right? So there are all those streams that flow into what you'd call country, and I can't think of them now. But certainly there was hillbilly music back when, and then there was gospel stuff, and then there was kind of a moonshine distillery and the mountains kind of stuff. I don't even know how it all works, but it all comes together and mixes into this amalgam called country, and I don't even know how to quite define it when I think about it. But yeah, I went to I forget but the country music museum in Nashville. I was there earlier this year, and it was fascinating. There's so much. People I'd never heard of or barely heard of who were huge and really influential. I can't even think of them right now, but some of those people with those pure voices like, hey, yeah, and that sound, it's primal, like you guys were saying earlier, right? There's almost like with bluegrass, I feel like there is this sort of primal, I guess I'll call it Americana sound, that kind of sends shivers up your spine because there's some recognition deep down. And I don't know, maybe you have to be from the South, but I'm not from the South, and I get those shivers.
I don't think so. I mean, I think Jeremiah tapped into something really important, which is that, you know, we were talking about kind of what defines modern day or, you know, pop country. But I remember growing up, like, what defined country music was suffering. Like the songs were all about loss and about like, I lost my dog, I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost my truck. You know, like it was always about suffering. Like that's what country music was about. And I think that that's not a Southern thing. That's a human being thing. It's the way that we're able to relate to the suffering that's in Isaiah. It's the way that we're able to relate to the suffering that's in the Psalms. That's not our history, but we can still call it Holy Scripture, right? Because we're human beings. We understand that human beings can suffer. And I think country music taps into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's universal. Yeah.
You know, and it's something that I think we tend to gloss over a lot because I think, you know, as Christians, we focus on good news. Like we just had this whole evangelism thing at my church recently, and it was all sort of like, I mean, I get it. Like it's evangelism. You want to put your best face forward. And, you know, God's great. It's good news, you know, gospel. I get it. But at the same time, like our Holy Scripture has some awful, you know, just not awful, but just moments where human beings are saying, you know what, God, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't like it. I'm suffering. I'm in pain. And I'm going to put this at your feet.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like other popular music that the songs about suffering tend to be songs about brokenheartedness, like romantic suffering. But country music has a wider story to tell about human suffering. Like obviously there's lots of great country love songs, but there's also a lot about work, you know, and labor and poverty and addiction. Like it's not just the only time you suffer is when your heart is broken by a lover. Like that's not it.
I'd say good country music, or the appeal of country music to me, is that at its root is suffering, right? And there's this thing to provoke empathy and identify with both the villain and the victimized in different contexts.
Yeah, there's poetry. I had a friend in college who was a writer. And, you know, he was a little out there here and there, but he was all about, I'm a writer, man, I'm a writer. And at a certain point, he said all music sucks except for country music, because that's where the poetry is, and that's where the stories are, and that's where the narrative is, and no other music matters. And he, you know, in his own inimitable way, he started wearing cowboy boots and cowboy hat from, you know, small town in Wisconsin. But there we are, you know. I think he's, you know, I love all kinds of music, of course, but it's easy for me to gloss over country music and dismiss it. And I think there's a wealth of gems in there if you give it a chance. And like lots of genres, there's a lot of stuff that you just would rather not listen to twice.
The state of Nebraska is really big, and there are different regions of it. And I've noticed that when I'm working with our churches in like ranching country, where the men, you know, like walk in the door and take their cowboy hat off and put it on a special rack in the church for their cowboy hats. There's like this hyper masculinity around that I perceive about that lifestyle. And those are the men that when I do retreats and meetings and ask them to share a story about a way that they've experienced the presence of Jesus in their life or in their church, they are the ones who weep easily and shamelessly. Like it's just very close to the surface emotionally. There's something about that agricultural life, I think, that puts you in a different orientation toward the creator. Like there's a humility around it. And country music is, even with all this bro country that we've, you know, referenced, there's a tenderness around masculinity that is surprising, I think. So if I imagine like those guys driving around in their pickups and on their combines and whatever, or driving cattle, and that's the song in their ear, like that really fits my experience of that group of people. But it's kind of countercultural in a big way. So the poetry is a part of that. Like there's a real beauty and like a desire for beauty in that music.
Yeah.
That dog got killed last summer out on Highway 53. Well, this is a backward country song. Everything's right, ain't nothing going wrong. Don't care if it's a cover or maybe just a dream. Everything is coming right back to me. Back to the host that took your boss to cut the well. Walking through the front door.
We have a final segment on the podcast called Staff Picks, where someone just recommends something to our audience. So, Greg, you got a staff pick for us. What did you bring?
Oh, man, Liz. I don't know how we've gone 98 episodes of this show.
I don't know how we've done that at all.
Period.
That's true.
Period.
To be fair, period.
Yeah.
But extend that out by saying, I don't know how we've gone 98 episodes on a show about pop culture, and we haven't talked about American Vandal on Netflix. Oh. Okay, here's the thing. Liz has gone black to American Vandal, but I am a huge American Vandal fan because it reminds me exactly of the kids that I work with on a regular basis. Like it feels like working with the young people that I work with. If you've never seen the show, so American Vandal is a faux documentary on Netflix about probably the most inane crime ever committed, where someone draws phalluses on the cars of the faculty at a high school. And so the high school AV club gets together and films this documentary trying to solve the mystery of who drew these obscene images on the faculty car.
And it's like Making a Murderer style. Like it's a super like crime documentary.
It's like Making a Murderer style. And it follows the exact same beats of something like a Serial or something like a Making a Murderer, where each episode kind of gives you just a few more clues to the crime so that you can kind of pick it up next week, and it gives you a few more breadcrumbs and you just kind of follow it until you solve the crime. But here's the thing. The first season, I think it's funny. I think it ends in a unique way where it kind of exposes like how, well, that's actually an interesting word. It shows how young people are exposed in this world of, you've got like memes and videos and stuff like that of your identity and yourself out there all the time. Like what that does to people, like how it affects the way they communicate, how it affects the way that they see each other. The first season is one thing. The second season is grotesque in its crime, but the final episode, the conclusions that it comes to about how young people are relating to each other and technology, I was a little teary. It was, it's a comedy, but it has this edge to it that makes it really kind of poignant in moments. And I don't know, I was a big fan. I know it's not going to be for everybody, but if you stick through all two seasons, like I came away with it thinking, having more empathy for the kids that I work with.
Yeah, I was talking to some of my students who are watching it, and it's the same way that, like, for the first 3 episodes of, say, the second season, you think it is a comedy, right? You think this is going to be something funny. But then this profound cultural critique starts coming out. Not just about kind of social media and vulnerabilities with regard to privacy issues with regard to that, but also just the way that our society is structured. I mean, privilege and the contrast between the classes. And the second season is set in this elite private school, right, where a huge issue becomes, should we give athletic scholarships? Is this huge thing that's raised. The most powerful thing, well, one of the most powerful scenes was where they do this immersion program in Central America, where they're supposedly helping people build houses or whatever, but it's a vacation. They stay in this high class resort and all of this partying, and it's the perfect example about how service and compassion completely gone off the rails. Where this is about you, it's about me feeling good about myself because I'm doing something that seems to be okay.
So American Vandal, watch at your own peril. I recommend it, but I have a strong stomach.
Thank you, Greg. That was awesome. You can find us at poppingcollarspodcast.com. You can find us on all of the social medias. You can, of course, find us on Apple Podcasts. And if you do that, please rate and subscribe and review us. That helps other people find our podcast. And you can also find us at episcopalcafe.com, where we are a part of their Episcopal Podcasting Network. Check them out for all of your Episcopal news and opinion needs. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you, Jeremiah, for joining us as our special guest.
And keep those colors popped.